Hello everyone, Curtis here again, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my personal calibration level and also telling you my story of how I got to where I am. I don't normally talk about myself too much, all this calibration stuff, just because it's something that I think most people tend to keep to themselves. But recently I was talking to someone on the phone about consciousness calibration. And at the end of the phone call, I said something to him like, "Oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to someday hitting consciousness level 500 because people talk about how there's Dr. Hawkins talked about the transformation that occurs then." And he said, "Oh, I thought you were already over 500." And I said, "No, no, not yet." And it just made me think that there's not that many people on the internet who actually talk about raising their level of consciousness personally. Everyone talks about the different levels and people ask for calibrations. Oh, what does this politician calibrate it? What does this book calibrate it? Whatever. But not too many people, in fact, almost nobody is talking about, I did this thing and I transcended a major level. There's some people that talk about, they'll say like, "Oh, I did this and my life improved." But when you actually ask, what did their calibration change in that? It's like, oh, their calibration rose by like half a point or something, or 0.1 points or whatever. But there's not that many people actually talking about how they made major spiritual progress, specifically following Dr. Hawkins' instructions and his teachings. So in this video, I'm going to be telling you about how I have done that, and the success that I've had, and where I'm at today. And I have some notes here just that I quickly made just to make sure I don't forget anything. So according to my calibration, my personal level of consciousness right now is at about 426.8. So that's like, low 400s. I think it's a pretty decent level, but of course, being that it's my life, I still see all of the limitation that I have yet to overcome. All the negativity within me, there's a long ways to go before I'm at any level that I would personally consider impressive, so to speak. Like I said in my previous alphabet calibration video, just a while back, when I measured it, there were 588 blocks within me to enlightenment. And I've only surrendered a few of them since then, so it's still probably around, 580 something. And so, I have a long ways to go. I'm definitely not bragging about my calibration or anything like that because I'm aware of how long the road will be to reach enlightenment, which is my final goal. But in this video, I'm going to be talking about not the future, but the past of all the levels that I have transcended and how I did that and stuff like that. So according to my calibration, when I was born into this body in this lifetime, my consciousness level was at 130. I was, in spiritual ignorance. I was not aligned with truth back then. And actually, at that time, all of my family calibrated below 200. My mother, my father, and my two brothers were all below 200. And today, my mom and dad are still below 200, and one of my brothers is still below 200. But actually, my other brother, all by himself, he rose above 200 a few years ago, which was amazing to me. But anyways, I'm just letting you know that I was born in negativity, and my whole family was negative. Not a great place to be. So nothing really happened until I was at 130 until age 7, and that's the first time a so-called spiritual event happened in my life, where something evolution occurred. And what happened was my father was a very devout Christian, and when I was 7 years old, he said to me, "Son, I want you to pray to Jesus and ask him to be your savior, and like commit to Jesus and stuff like that." And I took that seriously because I had been in, Bible study and church group for little kids and stuff at the time. And, so I had been fully, I don't know if I should say indoctrinated, but fully brought into the whole Christian church thing, you know, like if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to burn in hell. Stuff like that. So, I went to my bedroom. I still remember this. I went to my bedroom and I got down on my knees and I prayed to Jesus. And in that moment, I had a spiritual choice to make. It was basically my first real spiritual choice in this lifetime. I could either fake a prayer and just pretend to ask Jesus to be my savior, or I could legitimately humble myself and ask him to save me, which would basically be admitting that, you know, my narcissistic ego is in need of salvation. But in that moment, there came a knowingness that I just knew that you can't lie to God. You know, I said, if I fake this prayer, you know, just to make my dad happy, there's going to be consequences because I'm basically lying to God. And I still believed in all the, God will punish you for sin and all that stuff. So in that moment, I asked Jesus to be my savior, and I really meant it, and I humbled myself. And according to my calibration now, you know, all these years later, that was the first time in this life of mine that my calibration increased. It increased by asking Jesus to be my savior and humbling myself. It increased a couple points, something like 3 points maybe. But what I realized since then is that that moment, it sort of aligned me with the power of Jesus Christ as my savior. And his power has been uplifting me ever since. And I think that's really the source of where all my spiritual evolution has come from. If I had never done that, you know, my life would have been entirely different. So anyways, that was age 7. Oh, by the way, I said I was born at consciousness level 130. According to my calibration, I do have several past lives on this planet as a human, but I've never investigated them at all. Frankly, I don't really want to, because I look back at my life at how negative it was when I was a child, and I say, if I was that negative at 130, you know, or around there, then my past lives must have been really negative. So I really don't want to remember bad memories from past lives lived at consciousness level like 50 or 75 or something for a whole lifetime. I mean, that's just amazing to me. So anyways, my consciousness started evolving at age 7, and then eventually I reached a point at age 17. Actually, let me think. Around the time I turned 17, which was in the summer before my senior year of high school. And in the summer before my senior year of high school, I reached the calibration level of pride. And I remember that feeling very distinctly because it felt good. And like Dr. Hawkins says, pride feels great compared to, you know, when all you know is the lower levels and you achieve pride, it feels really good. Well, at the time, it did feel really good. I remember feeling prideful of myself, and it was specifically because I was going to be a high school senior. Because in my high school, at least, when you're a teenager, it's basically like the older kids are automatically the cool kids. And even if you were a total loser, if you were a senior, you were automatically cooler than everyone else that was not a senior, that was younger than you. So that's the source of the pridefulness, I think. That I guess I had evolved to anger. I don't really remember whenever I hit anger, not really. But I guess I was in anger, and then the move to being a high school senior, like that egotism lifted me up to pride. And so I went into senior year in the consciousness level of pride, and some months later, I don't remember exactly when, I transcended pride and hit courage. And I still remember the exact moment. I don't remember the date, but I remember the moment. I was in my room. I was crying about, you know, something like an argument with my parents or something like that. And just out of nowhere, completely spontaneously, I was faced with a extraordinary spiritual choice. And suddenly I realized that I was in denial of a certain truth about myself that deep down I knew was true, but I had been in psychological denial of it. And in this moment, it's like the ego itself, the source of negativity, it spoke to me. It's almost as if my ego was one entity and my spirit was another entity, and I was the spirit and I was listening to the ego talk. And the ego said, if you admit this truth to yourself, God will condemn you to hell for all eternity. And The truth that I was admitting was that I had committed a certain sin um, in the Bible that it tells you not to do. And at that time, I believed in the whole story of heaven and hell, that God will, punish you and send you to hell if you're a sinner. And so this truth that I was admitting was that I was a sinner, basically. And so part of me was terrified that if I admit I'm a sinner, God is going to, find out or something and send me to hell. Um, but at the same time, I knew that part of me knew that being in denial of the truth was causing me extraordinary suffering. Some part of me knew that. And at that moment, the suffering of being in denial of the truth was so great that I said, I don't care if God condemns me to hell for all eternity. I'm going to admit this truth anyways. And basically I admitted that I was a sinner. It was more specific than that. It was a specific sin, but I'd rather not get into that in this video. But I admitted that I was a sinner, that I was committing one of the sins that the Bible commands you not to. And in that moment, I transcended consciousness level 200. And in that moment, actually, I remember the specific feeling because it was a crazy feeling. I felt within me, it was as if I actually felt myself being born. And I felt within me there was like a nothingness in my spirit, and then it emerged into a soul. And I think what that was what Dr. Hawkins called the etheric brain, or the part of the etheric body that emerges when you transcend 200. He talks about an etheric brain. I think that's basically what it was. But I actually felt the feeling. Imagine if you're a baby and you're being pushed out of your mother's womb, and you feel the feeling of emerging out into the light, fully conscious. Well, that's what I felt in my soul. It was almost like I felt my soul emerge from nothingness into somethingness. And that was a feeling of spiritually being born, I guess. My soul being born, in a sense. Or something like that. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this. But in that moment, I felt that, and I didn't know what had happened. I did not know because I had never read Dr. Hawkins' books yet. I didn't know about the levels of consciousness yet. But I knew that some great transformation had taken place. And I could tell something big had happened. And as soon as I admitted the truth to myself and that happened, I realized that what the ego had said to me was a lie. The ego had said, if you admit the truth to yourself, God will condemn you to hell for all eternity. That's actually the opposite of what was true. What was true is that I was already in my own self-created hell by being in denial of the truth. And by admitting the truth, I released myself from that hell. So the ego's words were actually the exact opposite of the truth. Now I know, oh, that's no surprise, because the ego is built from falsity and illusion and lies. So that was at age 17 in high school, a senior in high school. I transcended consciousness level 200. Oh, another thing is, after every major level, it seems that there's a period, usually that lasts a couple months, of adjustment, where you adjust to your new state of being. And the funny thing about consciousness level 200 for me is that after I transcended and reached courage, I actually started cursing a lot. Now this might not make any sense. You're like, wait a second, you became more spiritual and then you started cursing. But actually, as a young child, my parents had been very strict with not allowing me to say any curse words. In fact, my mother wouldn't even let me say the word crap. And I always had this belief that God will, punish me if I'm an evil sinner that says curse words. Keep in mind, I was a stupid teenager. I was 17 years old, not very smart. But I always had this idea that God will punish me if I use curse words. And then when I reached courage, I realized that God doesn't punish you for stuff like that. I realized that God is a loving God. Or at least on the map of consciousness it says it's like God is a permitting God or something like that. And yeah, that's how I viewed it. I realized when I realized that truth, I realized God won't punish me for cursing. And so for like a couple months, I actually enjoyed cursing a lot. I went a little bit overboard and started using curse words a lot. And one of my friends noticed, and he's like, "Oh, dude, you're," I don't know. He noticed, but I thought that was funny in retrospect. That I was enjoying my newfound courage by doing something stupid like that. because I was finally over the fear. With the courage, I was finally over the fear that God would punish me for cursing. So I wanted to, like, I guess, have fun and curse a lot. I don't know. I was a dumb teenager. But, so that was high school. Transcended 200 at age 17 in my senior year of high school. And then about a year later, around a year later in college, I was 18, and I found some guru, so to speak, quote unquote, who I later discovered was a fallen guru. He had previously calibrated very high, but then had fallen below 200. And by the time I had started following him, he was below 200. But I didn't know that at the time because I hadn't read Dr. Huggins' work yet. But this particular guru, he was still he was recommending people to read Power versus Force because he was like kind of piggybacking off of Dr. Huggins' work and trying to like tell people he was calibrating stuff and whatever, and he wasn't actually calibrating properly, but he was trying to talk like he was. Anyways, I eventually stopped following him after I realized that he was kind of crazy, but not before getting myself a copy of Power vs. Force. And I got like an ebook copy of it or something on my computer, some PDF copy or something. And I read the whole book in 3 days. And at the end of 3 days, my consciousness was like, my mind was being blown. And actually, at the end of reading Power vs. Force, I had transcended courage and moved into neutrality. And like Dr. Hawkins says in Power vs. Force, the first time you read the book, most people experience a significant increase in their consciousness level just by being exposed to that truth. And in my case, that did happen. I was very much, I think I was very receptive to the truth. Like I valued truth for its own sake, and that's probably why I got so much from reading Power vs. Force the first time. So just by reading Power vs. Force, I moved from courage to neutrality. And I remember on the third day when I finished the book, I remember I was in my dorm room. I walked out of my dorm room, and it was like my whole perception of life was different. Physically, my perception was physically different. It's almost like I was looking at like the grass and the sidewalk and stuff, and it was almost like my sense of vision had expanded out of my body and was connecting with the grass and the sidewalk around me, and my mind was just expanded. And the feeling, if you've ever had an experience where your level of consciousness increases significantly all at once, I think that's what happened to me. It was crazy, but yeah. And I think a few weeks later, I found someone that had actually been calibrating properly, and I asked him for a calibration, and he calibrated me at 252 at the time. So that was a little bit after reading Power vs. Force, maybe a few weeks, maybe a month or two, I don't remember. Yeah, so I moved from courage to neutrality just by reading Power vs. Force, which is pretty amazing. I'm not sure exactly what level I calibrated at when I started reading Power vs. Force, but somewhere in courage. Anyways, when this happened, even though I was over 200 and I had just reached neutrality and all that good stuff, I was still suffering immensely from an emotional standpoint because I used to suffer from 3 personality disorders. One of them was clinical depression, like suicidal, very, very strong depression on a mostly daily basis. One of them was bipolar mania, which in and of itself would not be too bad, but when you combine it with the depression, it's pretty bad. It causes you to make stupid decisions, basically. And I also suffered from a severe anxiety disorder called avoidant personality disorder, which I actually made a previous video about. You can look that up in my channel. But anyways, so at this time, even though I calibrated like 252 at 18 years old, I still was suffering greatly because I still had these 3 disorders. And I realized that reading Power vs. Force had increased my happiness a lot. It expanded my mind, my consciousness. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And so I sort of said, you know what? If I can just evolve enough spiritually, maybe all this sadness and stuff I was experiencing, all this depression, maybe it would go away. And so I set my mind on I want to raise my level of consciousness. That's the only thing that matters more than anything. I paid more attention to that than, my college work, which in retrospect may have been a bad idea. But um, I basically, my whole focus in life became on, I was like obsessed with raising my level of consciousness and being devoted to truth. Because I realized, I think I was so receptive to truth, and I realized how valuable it was, and that it had made me happier. And I had remembered from age 17 when I hit courage, and now that I had read Power vs. Force at age 18, I realized that what had happened at age 17 was I had hit courage. I had gone from pride to courage. So I realized, like, this stuff he's talking about in this book, it's real. Like, I've experienced it. It's real. And so I set my intention greatly on raising my level of consciousness. And yeah, so that was my main focus. And I started reading all these other books in order, all the spirituality books. And later let me see, it was the summer after my freshman year of college. I think it was it was like a couple weeks after I turned 19. In June or July, one of those months of summer, I actually hit willingness. So I had been so obsessed with raising my level of consciousness that in a matter of something like 6 or 8 months, I went from hitting neutrality to hitting willingness, which in retrospect is kind of amazing. But I guess I did it because that's just how much I cared about truth and being devoted to Dr. Hawkins' teachings and all that. But anyways, I still remember hitting willingness. And when it happened, I knew exactly what had happened because I had been reading Dr. Hawkins' books religiously. I was sitting in a bookstore in another country, actually, on an internship I was on in the summer. And I was sitting in a bookstore and I was reading some kind of, like self-help book or something about making money or whatever. And just all of a sudden, I felt this shift inside me, and it was almost like a jolt. It was almost like a feeling of you're in a roller coaster that's just risen up a huge hill, and you go from not moving to to moving forward. That's what it felt like when I moved from neutrality to willingness, when I hit 310. And at that moment, it almost felt like there was like a magnet pulling me forward. And I realize now that was the feeling. Actually, I realized at the time that was the feeling of willingness, the energy of willingness. Dr. Hawkins talks about it at 310, calibration 310. Yeah, so I was just sitting in a bookstore, and unexpectedly, I hit willingness. But it was the result of several months of being devoted to reading Dr. Hawkins' work and stuff. So anyways, yeah, I felt the physical, it was almost like I said, when I hit 200, I felt like my soul being born. Well, it's almost like when I hit willingness, I felt my soul like moving forward. It actually felt like it was drawing me forward, like someone had turned on a magnet for my soul, and it was pulling my soul forward, which pulled my body forward, and it really gave me a lot of energy to participate in life and stuff like that. But I still had my 3 psychological disorders. Still, had a lot of depression and stuff, bad problems with that. But anyways, strangely enough, the next day, literally the one day after I hit willingness, I was chatting with someone on Instant Messenger from overseas, back home. I was in Singapore at the time. I was chatting with someone back home, and I don't really want to go into like personal details of their life because it kind of affects them. But basically, I discovered that a really good friend of mine had done something that betrayed my trust, and it was extremely painful for me. Someone had very seriously betrayed me, and I was very upset and devastated over it. Um, and yeah, it was terrible at the time. But what I realized, many months later or whatever, is that by hitting willingness, this betrayal that I found out about the next day, it was actually consciousness setting up an opportunity for me to forgive that betrayal and hit acceptance, which actually I was still devoted to raising my level of consciousness. It was still the number one thing I cared about more than anything else at this time. And so I found out about that betrayal the day after I hit willingness, and about maybe 8 months later, sometime the next year, I don't remember exactly, but sometime in the next school year, during my sophomore year, I eventually came to the knowingness that if I wanted to succeed in a certain part of my life, I needed to get over the betrayal and I needed to forgive my friend. If I wanted to be successful at something which I cared about deeply, I needed to forgive well, he was previously my best friend, but now I wasn't talking to him. I needed to forgive him and let go of my grudge against him. And strangely enough, at this time, I was not trying to do this out of an effort of spiritual progress. I was trying to do it for like worldly progress, sort of like basically it was interfering with my relationship at the time. This grudge that I had against my old best friend, he had betrayed me, and it was really hurting me, and it was hurting my relationship at the time with the girl who I loved. Who, oddly enough, I'm in a relationship with right now. Actually, we broke up for many years and then we got back together. But at the time, this betrayal, it was bothering me so much that it was carrying over to my relationship. And I said, you know what? I love my girlfriend, and if I am going to get over that so that I can have a good relationship, I need to forgive my old best friend so that I can get past this betrayal. It was really like causing a lot of depression and anger and stuff. So anyways, I still remember, this might be too much information, but I was standing in the shower and, relaxing in the hot water. And suddenly I just, I knew now's the time I have to forgive my friend, ex-best friend, whatever. Friend, ex-friend, something like that. And so I visualized the grudge that I had against him within me. And it's almost like I could see it as an energy field of negativity within me. It was almost like I was holding a solid object within me that was this grudge I had against my friend. And what it actually was, it was like my judgment of him. And in that moment, I remember, just like I said, the ego spoke to me when I hit 200 and told me a lie. Well, the ego actually spoke to me again at this time, and it said, if you forgive your friend, he wins this conflict that you're having. It said to me, if you forgive and if you let go of this grudge against him, he will win this conflict, because you can, and it was implying like you can only get even with him for his betrayal if you hold on to this grudge. But anyways, at that time, again, I rejected the voice. I said, okay, he's gonna win this conflict, this fight between us, but I have to let go of the grudge anyways, because this grudge is interfering with my relationship, and I love my girlfriend, and out of my love for my girlfriend, out of the motivation of love, I will let go of this grudge, which is messing up my relationship. And so in that moment, I visualized the grudge within me, and I could see it almost in my hands in front of me, actually, I think. And I let go of it, and I chose to release it. And in that moment, a major transformation occurred, and I actually hit consciousness level 350. Which beforehand, I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know forgiving him would do that. But afterwards, I guess it made sense, because 350 is the level of forgiveness. If you look at the map of consciousness, it says 350 is something like the emotional level of forgiveness, or something like that. Yeah, so I let go of the grudge, and I got back to my dorm room after my shower, and I was just like bouncing up and down, literally, because when I let go of the grudge, it actually felt like a significant physical weight had been dropped out of my body. Like it literally felt like I was 50 pounds lighter. It felt like all my life I had been holding on to some heavy dumbbells or something, and I had just let go of them, and now I could bounce up and down. I had like boundless energy, And for maybe like 2 or 3 months, like the period of adjustment I talked about with every major level of consciousness, well, at 350, it's a major period of adjustment because it's a major jump. And yeah, for like 2 or 3 months maybe, I was just like, nothing could bother me at all. Like even my depression, it was like, in the background. And I was just elated for like a couple months until I sort of settled into the level of 350. But I still did actually have my depression. Strangely enough, somehow I reached consciousness level 350, all the way up there, and I still had my 3 psychological disorders. So, but anyways, I was very happy for a couple months, and then I realized, oh, my life isn't perfect yet. I still have all these problems, and so I sort of settled into it. Um, and then for, like I said in my previous video about alphabet calibration, my level of consciousness stayed about the same for about 8 years, or something like 8 or 9 years. I don't know, something like that, 8 or 9 years. And I won't go into all those years because they're not that important. But along the way, first several years ago, I found some medications that helped with my depression and my bipolar disorder, my mania. And then a couple years ago, I cured my anxiety disorder by using the letting go technique. And that's actually what my first YouTube video is about. You can go watch it if you want. So I cured my anxiety disorder, and then just last year in 2018, in about May, I started working with a spiritual therapist, which I've mentioned once or twice previously in my previous videos. And in working with him, at this time, I kind of got back into calibration, or not calibration. I got back into spiritual work. I think what had happened is, after all these years of kind of chilling out at the level of acceptance, I had finally sort of like maybe paid off a karmic debt or something like that, or I was finally ready. My soul was like finally ripe to continue its evolution. And so I worked with a spiritual therapist, and within a matter of weeks, my bipolar mania vanished from my life, which is amazing. And then a little bit later, I realized that I could use calibrations myself, and that's when I started discovering alphabet calibration and started raising my level of consciousness. And last year, let me just check my email real quick. Last year, I had someone else calibrate me near the beginning of the year. Let me see. Let me just look up this old email real quick. I had someone else calibrate me, basically, and at the time, I calibrated at 366 in April. Yeah, April of 2018. So I calibrated at 366 after all these years sitting in acceptance. So, when I was in college, between age 17 and 19, I went from, pride all the way up to acceptance, but then I chilled out for like 8 or 9 years or something like that. All these years, And I think what it was is my soul just needed to like ripen and get ready for the future progress. I think that's what it was. Dr. Hawkins has mentioned that in 1 or 2 videos before, how sometimes it appears as if you're not achieving anything, but actually what's happening is, I don't know if he said the words, the soul is ripening, but he said something like that, like the consciousness is preparing for future work, something like that. And I think in retrospect, that's what my consciousness was doing all those years, chilling out in acceptance. And eventually, it sort of, I guess I undid enough spiritual karma, or maybe I suffered enough from my psychological problems that I earned the right to be rid of them. And now I'm rid of all 3 of them. I got rid of my anxiety, my bipolar mania, and my depression, and now I'm a relatively psychologically normal person. Thankfully, I don't think I have any more really psychological disorders. That's great. So anyways, last year I started doing calibrations and alphabet calibration and started surrendering. I got back into the spiritual game, raising my level of consciousness, got back to being devoted to truth and all that good stuff. And let me see my notes. There's not a lot more in my notes, but I could talk a little bit about my current levels. Oh yeah, a couple months ago, like I said in my previous video, a couple months ago, doing alphabet calibration, removing negativities within myself. I removed my depression. It actually happened accidentally. I wasn't targeting it specifically, but my depression went away, and I stopped taking my meds for that, and everything went out. Everything worked fine. So right now I'm actually on no meds at all, and I'm totally normal, just as a result of spiritual progress, which is pretty amazing. Also, a few months ago, I hit calibration level 400. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I calibrate right now at 426.8 or 9 or something like that. I think it's 426.8. And a couple months ago, I hit 400, and that was interesting. It was not at all a major change like hitting acceptance was. But I think one of the reasons why it wasn't super major is because I was expecting it this time. I knew ahead of time that I calibrated at like 399.7 or something like that, and I was like working on getting to 400, and I finally surrendered one more block, and I hit 400. And actually, I can talk about that a little bit. I surrendered a block that I didn't understand, which is interesting because every block before that I had been getting with alphabet calibration, I understood what the block was. And I got myself, from like 366 up to 399. And but then I had this one block that I didn't understand, and then I suddenly realized, oh, I don't have to understand it. I can just surrender it to God. And surrendering that block without understanding it is actually how I hit 400, which is the level of understanding on the map of consciousness, which I thought was very ironic. And I realized that I understand very little, and God understands everything. So if you trust in God, you don't have to understand things yourself. You can just rely on His power and His wisdom. So that was a realization I had when I hit 400, and also my life suddenly felt very meaningful. And that's also on the map of consciousness. It says level 400 is the level at which you feel meaningful. I think that's the self view on the map of consciousness. I don't have it in front of me, but I think from memory it's called self view, and it says meaningful at 400. And that's exactly what happened. Is as soon as I hit 400, I realized that the meaning of my life is to become enlightened, and thus I felt very meaningful. Now before that, yes, I was pursuing spiritual growth, but I never really had like a definite life purpose. So my life didn't feel meaningful necessarily. But once I hit 400, it came to my awareness that the purpose of my life is to become enlightened. That's like the overall spiritual purpose, not necessarily the physical purpose, like what are you going to do for a job or something. But yeah, so I hit 400 a few months ago. Now, right before, in the weeks before I hit 400, weeks or maybe a month or two, my first YouTube video, if you watch it, the anxiety video, I actually calibrated in the 390s in that video. That was before I hit 400. Basically, I had hit 390, and 390, Dr. Huggins said, is the level of enthusiasm, and that is correct. At 390, I became very enthusiastic, just about life in general, about spiritual work, and also about helping other people. And I realized that I could make that video and also write the little book that I wrote along with it to help people that had previously suffered from the same anxiety disorder I had. So in that video, I calibrated at 393 or something like that in the video, in the 390s. And the book itself, the video itself, I calibrated the content of my video at 310, so it's a little bit of a disparity. But the essence of the video is talking about being willing to face your fear. So I think that's where the 310 calibration comes in, at willingness. And then the book that I wrote along with it, it's a short ebook right now that I link to under the video. I wrote the book to go into more detail about it, just so people could have it, in a text format. And the book, the original first draft of it, calibrated at 310, but then I decided to use calibration to improve it. Because I remember Dr. Hawkins saying that out of obligation to all of his students, he calibrated every sentence in every book that he wrote to make sure that they contained no falsehoods, that it was only speaking truth. And I actually did that for that short book that I wrote. I calibrated every single sentence in it. I used, over the course of a week or two, I did more than 3,000 calibrations to calibrate every sentence in the book. And anytime a word was like a little bit incorrect, like it introduced some falsehood into the sentence, I corrected it. And the calibration of the book, actually, the content of the book moved from 310 to 350 by perfecting, or I guess not perfecting, but by adjusting all the words and sentences so that they contain no falsehood. And so all of the sentences in that book actually calibrated at least 200 or over. And it would actually surprise you how many were below 200 before I did that. Even though I personally calibrated at 390 something when I wrote it, and the idea of it was at 310. Apparently, a lot of falsehood was in the book accidentally. Like I would use like a comparison, and I'd say some words, but they'd be like the wrong words. It wasn't like blatant falsehoods, teaching anybody on purpose falsehoods, but it was like accidental falsehoods. But anyways, I performed a heck of a lot of calibrations that week, and I fixed all the sentences in the book, and they all calibrate at 200 or over right now. However, the great irony is I still need to fix the cover image, because apparently the cover image calibrates at 199. Because when I had an artist make it, I never thought about calibrating the cover image. I just thought, oh, I just put the title on the cover with the yellow background and blah blah blah, whatever. But apparently it was messed up a little bit, and it calibrates at 199. But don't worry about that. That's just the cover image. I will have it fixed in the future. But the content of the ebook is at 350. And it's about dealing with your anxiety. Anyways, I kind of got off on a sidetrack. That's just something that I'm passionate about, is teaching people how to overcome anxiety, because it's something I did. But anyways, so over the last few months, I've been slowly rising over, through the 300s, now through the low 400s. And an interesting thing is that I can actually feel, Dr. Hawkins says on the Map of Consciousness that 400s is the level of abstraction. And that's actually what I feel when I increase my level of consciousness now. I feel my mind becoming more sophisticated. And actually there was one day, like several weeks ago, maybe like a month and a half ago or something, I surrendered a big block, and my level of consciousness increased by like a whole point in one day, which is actually way more than it usually does. And in that moment, with that big jump, I felt my mind, I was like, whoa, my mind just became, you can actually feel it become more sophisticated. Like, your mind is becoming more capable of processing spiritual truth and concepts in the world, I think. Possibly. Maybe how spiritual truth applies to the world, something like that. It's hard to explain, but basically, I can feel my mind becoming more sophisticated as I raise slowly through the 400s. Now, another interesting thing is my progress is slowing down a little bit. It's still going, but it's slowing down. And I think the reason it's slowing down is because my life has become so much more comfortable since I've raised my level of consciousness from last year in like 360, starting at 366 now to 426. I mean, that's quite a jump. But my life is much more comfortable now, and I think that's actually working against me. Because I look back in my life, I realize I make the most spiritual progress when I'm the most uncomfortable, which is kind of funny. And I think Dr. Hawkins actually mentioned that in one of his videos, one of his lectures one time. He said sometimes you make something, I don't want to misquote him, but he said something about how when life is really bad, you can make a lot of spiritual progress by surrendering a lot to God. And so yeah, so my progress is slowing down a little bit. But it's also slowing down because instead of just focusing on raising my level of consciousness, I'm also trying to do other things. I'm trying to do experiments with different things with consciousness that I'll probably talk about later if they're successful. I don't know. I don't want to mislead people by giving you ideas that end up not working out. But anyways, yeah, I've been distracted working on things that are not necessarily related to spiritual development per se, but they are related to calibration and consciousness and stuff. But yeah, I'll talk about those at some later time if they're successful. But right now I'm at 426.8, and I look forward to slowly but surely getting through the 400s, and someday hitting 500. At my current rate, maybe it'll happen in the next year or so. I don't know. I'm thinking I'm gonna start being more serious about raising my level of consciousness and start doing it. You know, maybe instead of doing like one block every other day, which is kind of what I've been doing, maybe trying to do like one block every day or 2 blocks a day or something like that. I don't know. I think at some point I will get more serious, and I'm gonna just start hopefully jumping up through the 400s, because it's almost intimidating that like, oh, I have to go up like 100 points just to get from 400 to 500. But at the same time, it's really a great opportunity, because when you think about it, raising your level of consciousness is all it really is you're letting go of your negative attachments in life, and your life automatically becomes happier and more fulfilling and more positive as a result of that. So it's actually a great opportunity. The ego kind of wants to think of it as a daunting challenge, but it's actually a great opportunity. So anyways, that's all the notes I have. I sort of gave you the overview of my life, all the levels of consciousness that I transcended. And it's not that I have done anything amazing. It's really that God has been great and merciful in my life. And like I said, I've had this feeling that ever since I was 7 years old and I prayed to Jesus and asked him to save my soul, I've had this feeling that his energy has been uplifting me ever since then. And I think that's what drives me and inspires me and uplifts me, is his power. And so it's not that I have done anything great to achieve, all this consciousness progress or spiritual development. It's really that he has uplifted me. So anyways, that's my story so far, and I guess I'll make more videos in the future if I have more stuff to share. But if you know what, if you would like to, you could leave a comment telling me if you have ever, I don't know who really listens to these videos, but whoever it is, if you've ever transcended a major level of consciousness, why don't you leave a story about your experience in the comments, and I promise I read every single comment on all my videos. It might take me a couple days to notice them, but I do get to them eventually. And so yeah, I would love to read other people's stories, because like I said at the beginning of the video, there's almost nobody talking about how they transcended major levels of consciousness following Dr. Hawkins' work, even though his books have sold many thousands of copies, so I'm sure there's many people around the world that have done that. So yeah, if you want to leave your story in the comments, I'd love to read those. And I guess that's all I have for now. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.